In last couple of lectures, we talked about different ways of handling events in JavaScript. We talked about inline event handlers and we also talked about event handler properties. Now there is one more way to handle events in JavaScript, and that is by using addEventListner method. The addEventListner method waits for a certain event to happen, and once that event happens, it executes a callback function. Let's understand this with an example. So here we are using event handler properties to handle this click event for this button, this focus and blur event for this first name text box. Now, instead of using event handler properties, let's see how to use addEventListner method to handle these events. So let's comment this code here and let's see how to use addEventListner method. So the first thing we have to do is we have to get access to the element, and we can do that by using getElementById method or querySelector method. So I'm using getElementById method, and let's pass the ID of the button, which is btn. And on this, we can use addEventListner method. Okay, so first we have to get access to the element. So this getElementById method will return us that element, and on that element we are using this addEventListner method. Now this addEventListner method takes two parameters. The first parameter should be the event which this addEventListner should be listening to, and here we want to listen to click event. So let's pass click. And the second parameter is the callback function, which will get executed when this event happens. Okay, and we want to execute this display alert function when click event happens on this button. And this display alert function is going to display an alert window with this message. So let's pass this display alert function as its callback function. All right, let's save the changes and let's see if it is working. So if I click on the submit button, here you can see it is displaying this alert window. All right, so we can use addEventListner method on the element, and we can pass the event name which this method should be listening to, and the callback function which should get executed when that event happens. All right, now let's do the same thing for this first name text box. So for this first name text box, we want to handle the focus event and blur event. So let's do that by using addEventListner method. And the first thing we have to do is we have to get access to that element. So document.getElementById. The ID of this text box is fname. So let's pass that. And then let's add addEventListner method. And this addEventListner method should be listening to focus event. And when this focus event happens, let's say we want to execute an anonymous function. So let's specify an anonymous function for callback function. And inside this function, we simply want to change the background color of this text box to yellow. So again, let's say document.getElementById, and we are passing the ID of this text box, which is fname, and we want to set its style, and we want to change the background color to yellow. Let's save the changes, and when I click inside this text box, now its background color is changing to yellow, right? Let's also listen to the or handle the blur event for this text box. So let's copy this complete code. Let's use it here, and now I want to listen to blur event. So blur, and instead of changing the background color to yellow, let's change it back to white. Let's save the changes. So when I click inside this text box, it is changing to yellow. When I click outside of it, the blur event happens and it changes back to white. Okay, so in this way, you can use addEventListner method to listen to an event, and when that event happens, the second parameter which we are passing for the callback function, that callback function will get executed. So far we have talked about the click event, focus event, and blur event. Let's talk about mouse over event and mouse out event. So a mouse over event happens when you put your mouse cursor on an element. For example, when I put it on this H2 element, the mouse over event happens, and when I remove my cursor from that element, mouse out event happens. Similarly, when I put my cursor on this element, this first name, this text box element, the mouse over event happens, and when I remove it, mouse out event happens. So let's also learn about these two events. So what I want is, I want to get access to this element, this h2 element, and when a user mouse over on this h2 element, its color should change to red. And when mouse out event happens, its color change back to black. So let's see how to do that. So first thing we have to do is we have to get access to this h2 element. So document.getElement by id, and let's see what is the id of this h2 element. So let me scroll here, and here we don't have any id for this h2. So let's give an id here. Let's call it maybe registration. Okay, let's copy this id and let's pass it to this getElement by id method, and let's use addEventListner method, and this method should be listening to mouse over event. Okay, and when the mouse over event happens, we want to execute this anonymous function, and inside this function, let's say we want to change the background color of this element to red. So let's copy this, and let's say dot style dot, and we want to change the color, not the background color, so color, and let's set it to red. Let's save the changes. Let's see if it is working. So if I hover over this, somehow it is not working. That's because this red should be within quotes. Let's save the changes. Let's hover over this, and nothing is okay. Now it is working. Okay, so here it has changed to red, and let's refresh this page again, and let's see. So when I hover over it, its color is changing to red. And let's also do this for mouse out. So when the mouse out event happens, we want to change its color back to black. So the event name should be mouse out, and the color should be black. If I save the changes, let's see if it is working. So when I hover over it, and the color of this h2 element is changing to red, and when I remove my cursor, its color is changing back to black. Okay, so this is mouse over and mouse out event in JavaScript. And for the complete list of events, you can refer this MSDN link, where you will get a complete list of events which we have in JavaScript. So this addEventListner method is very useful for handling events, and you will see me using addEventListner methods for handling events throughout this course.